The Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, "If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." But they said to him, "Teacher, we are children of Abraham and have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying we will be made free?" Everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave has no permanent place in the household, but the Son has a place there forever. So if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Lord.
I invite you to be seated. On this day of Reformation, we remember that 501 years ago, Martin Luther, on this day, pounded on the door of the local church a list of 95 theses, 95 things that he wanted to discuss in a theological and academic forum. And this was the start of what has become known as the Reformation. His goal was to reform the church. If you remember your history at all, at this time, this is towards the end of the Dark Ages. The Renaissance is going on, just beginning in Italy, and the Reformation is now starting in Germany, and they are going to change the world. The Reformation and the Renaissance are going to change the world. And the Renaissance or the Reformation comes from Martin Luther, a monk who has become a teacher at Wittenberg University in Germany, and he's lived his whole life under the thumb of the Pope. And at that time, the thumb of the Pope was a pretty heavy thumb. And the Pope made all sorts of new rules and regulations and new things that people had to follow. And Luther, one day, while preparing for class on the letter to the Romans, read what Kathy just read from Romans 3. And he had an aha moment. One of the best aha moments in the history of mankind. Because for the 1,500 years from Jesus and Paul to Martin Luther, the church had gotten so far away from grace that it essentially had forgotten God's unconditional love that's given to us so freely. And Martin Luther, in his aha moment and in his other aha moments that followed on this, wanted to put grace back in its proper place. In its proper place as the primary reason that God is. Primary reason that God exists is so that we can exist in God's love. And so, Martin Luther was tired of all of the new laws and so much focus on the new laws. But as we get to today, let's admit that we, or almost all of we, like laws. We like, even if we don't always follow them, traffic laws. Right? We don't always follow them, but I think most of us always drive on the right side of the road. We kind of like those kind of laws. We kind of like laws that, like the Ten Commandments. Do not steal, do not commit adultery, don't murder, don't covet your neighbor's wife. Those kind of laws we kind of like. because they give us some direction. For those of us in sports, we like the rules, the laws of the games. How many people stayed up for all 18 innings the other night? Oh my goodness. Yes, so many Dodger fans have stayed up till 12:30 to watch our one win so far. But we'll ask for God's grace on the Dodgers. Because we know that God doesn't care about the baseball game. Rules and laws, we kind of like them. But we fall into the trap when we start to like all of these rules. We start to fall into the trap that the church had fallen into before Martin Luther. And we start to think that doing good things, following the law and doing things for others is going to get us extra points with God. And that we all need a certain number of points. We all need to climb the ladder to a certain height. We all need more good things than bad things on our lists. We start to fall into that trap. But it's God's grace, God's love that gets us out of that trap. There's a parable in Matthew 13 that talks about the pearl of great price. It's a short parable. It says, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all he had and bought it. That's it for the parable. There's no explanation that goes along with it. We're supposed to work on our own. What God means by this pearl merchant, jewelry merchant who goes out and sells everything so that he can buy this one pearl. God's love, God's grace is worth selling everything we have so that we can have that one pearl. The difference between us and the merchant is after we have given all for that pearl. Now wait a second. Haven't I talked about grace as being free, and now I'm talking about giving everything so that we can have the pearl? It's one of those paradoxes that we live with. It's once we know and understand and feel and have God's presence in our lives, and we know that free sense of grace, that we can then give everything for the pearl of great value and then give it away. And keep giving it away and giving it away and giving it away. God's grace, the heart of what Luther was all about, is what makes life worth living. But what does grace look like? What is grace? Whenever we think about God and what God is like, we need to look at Jesus. And what does Jesus look like? Well, one of the great things about what does Jesus look like is there are no contemporary paintings or drawings or anything of Jesus himself. So you can find pictures like these from every culture around the world where Jesus looks just like us. You can see the ones that were drawn in Africa. You can see the ones that were drawn in Asia. You can see a blue-eyed, kind of blonde-haired Jesus up in the upper right that many of us grew up with. One of the great things about images of Jesus is that Jesus can seem to be one of us. And we have to admit that the closer ones to what Jesus actually looked like are the ones where his skin is darker than ours, than most of ours. Because he was a Jew from the Middle East. But isn't it great that in God's grace we can have a Jesus that looks like us at times? Jesus is grace. He said in today's reading that everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. But he had good news after he said that. He said the slave doesn't have a place in the household, a permanent place in the household, but the son does. Jesus has a permanent place in the household, and if Jesus showers you with grace, then that will make you free. And he doesn't do it just once, and it's not something that's just happens in church. It's something that happens all through our lives. Do you have a definition of grace? You have something that you learned as a child, or maybe in some Bible study or anything, some definitive definition of grace for you? An undeserved gift, okay? What else? I know many people in Via de Cristo, whenever I ask the question, they say it's God's riches at Christ's expense. So I forget what you call that, but I use the first letters. But God's riches at Christ's expense. So that's one way to think about what grace is. When I was in confirmation 10 years ago at Grace Lutheran Church in Huntington Beach, Pastor Larson told us that in the 3 years of confirmation class, every Wednesday, we had to ride our bikes over to church in the afternoon and go to confirmation class. And he told us, if you don't remember anything at all for the rest of all of confirmation, remember this. Remember that grace is God's gift, given freely with no strings attached. He said, that's the one thing that I want you to remember if you remember nothing else. Well, I lived up to both. So I remembered that, and I remembered nothing else from confirmation class. But kind of that's a sense of what grace is all about. But I think grace comes to us more than just through anachronisms and different things that we can remember. God comes to us in grace through people. This is Hot Rod Will. How many people have been to a Jetbox game and seen Hot Rod Will rolling around in his wheelchair? He always has a smile on his face. He's got cerebral palsy. Or is it cystic fibrosis? Cerebral palsy, yeah. And can't talk, but boy, can he communicate. And he communicates joy. And he communicates love. And through him, he communicates God's grace. How about a couple of stories about God's grace? From the Gospel of Mark, the 10th chapter, there's a short story about blind Bartimaeus. Blind Bartimaeus lived in the town of Jericho. Remember the stories of Jericho, Joshua, and the army of Israel? It was the first fortified city that they came to when they crossed the Jordan into the promised land. It was the first walled city up on a hill that they needed to conquer, and God didn't let them do it in a normal way. Remember that Joshua and the army marched around the city morning after morning, and finally on the seventh morning, I think it was, they marched around and they blew the trumpets and the walls fell down. And they were able to conquer that first city as they came into the promised land. That city was rebuilt. And now we find blind Bartimaeus, who's at the city gates. And he's asking for alms, for people to give him some money or some food or something that will be helpful to him. And along comes Jesus. And he hears an uproar, and he hears that it is Jesus. And he starts to shout out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And the people around him tried to shush him, tried to quiet him down, and he said all the more emphatically, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus heard his cry. And he stood still. And he heard it again. And he said, "Have him come to me." And Bartimaeus, those around him said, "Get up, get up, he wants to see you." And can you imagine Bartimaeus being blind and stumbling, pushing through people and stepping in potholes and stumbling to get to Jesus? Now, certainly Jesus knew what Bartimaeus was all about and what his problem was. But he asked him, "What do you want of me?" He gave Bartimaeus the chance to express his deepest desires to Jesus. And he said, "Teacher, make me see again." And immediately Bartimaeus could see. God's grace, given free with no strings attached. One last story. It's not really it's a story. It's not a biblical story, though. It's a story that is in the Lutheran Church, a story that we don't like to hear of. And we don't like to mention it. And to be honest, in my theological career, I've never gone back and read these writings. But in Luther's later years, when things had started to get to him, we think he was certainly fighting depression, maybe bipolar depression. We knew that he was fighting illnesses. He had constant stomach pains. He constantly had people coming to him for nearly everything you can imagine, because he was the leader of this Reformation that was taking over the known world, that was making a difference in people's lives. And he wrote some incredibly nasty things about the Jews. Some incredibly nasty things that have been used throughout history, in particular in World War II, to say, see, even Martin Luther wrote about these Jews, and it's okay to get rid of them, in part because Martin Luther says it's okay to get rid of them. And it took us close to 500 years to go to our Jewish brothers and sisters and say, Martin Luther was wrong. He was a human being. But you, our Jewish brothers and sisters, have been harmed in ways that we can't imagine because of what Martin Luther said and wrote about you. And we want to come and we want to officially apologize. We want to come humbly and ask for your forgiveness. And they accepted. They accepted the apology and the renunciation. So on a day where yesterday Jews were killed in Pittsburgh simply for the reason that they were Jewish, we remember that we don't have a great history there except in this asking for forgiveness and receiving the grace back from the Jewish people. And so we remember in prayer today those who were attacked yesterday and those who have been attacked through the centuries simply because they're Jewish. But what do we do with this grace? What is it all about? How does it help us today? It does several things for us. This grace awakens within us a new faith. You see, this grace is always around us. It is always there. I have this sense that the grace, God's grace, is like air. It's always present. It's always there. And it's something that we don't even think about most of the time. But it's always present for us. And when we realize that God's grace is for us, it's then that we can go out and be God's grace for others. It imparts forgiveness. It imparts forgiveness through the meal that we will have in a few minutes. Through communion, it's one of the most tangible ways that we receive God's grace. That we can put in our hands the bread. That we can have in our hands the wine. The bread and wine, the body and blood of Jesus in that mystery that we don't understand. How Christ can be present in, under, and through this bread and wine like he is present in nowhere else. So we can receive this grace today at communion. And we can receive it all through the week, all through the month, all through the years, from people that we know who share God's grace with us. And it gives us a new status. It gives us a status as forgiven children of God. And it enables us to love. From Ephesians 2. For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing. It is a gift of God, not the result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are what he has made us, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand to be our way of life. It enables us to love, and it gives us hope. When we realize God's grace in our life, there is hope for today and hope for tomorrow and hope for all of eternity. So may we be people of the Reformation. People brave enough to stand up and say the status quo is no longer good enough. May we be people who live out grace in our daily lives, everywhere we go, in every person we see. May we share God's grace with them in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's stand